Okay, and if anybody can't hear us online, send us a little message. So welcome everybody to our second community of practice for 2023. So usually this event is emceed by the lovely James Wilson. Oh, I'm sounding very loud. But I'm Lauren Johnson, and because James can't be in two places at once today, I am going to attempt to live up to James's wonderful standards of emceeing today. So be kind, please. So today we're broadcasting to you from a new venue. So we're here at Clifton's in Edward Street in Brisbane, and it's a great new venue that we've discovered, and it's a beautiful day in Brisbane. So I hope everywhere that you're watching from is also a lovely, beautiful day. And thank you for coming. So we have got over 430 people registered to attend this event, and we've got a lovely full room here at Clifton's as well. So thank you so much for your interest in these events, and we keep putting them on because you keep coming, and it's really lovely to see the networking opportunities that we have and to see all of your lovely faces and matching them to the names that we see come through in our inbox. So today our theme is modern slavery and ethical considerations in procurement. Oh, there I am. Sorry. I said I wanted to have control of the clicker and then I didn't use the clicker. So firstly, I'm going to, I'll introduce Sharon Bailey, our Deputy Director General of Queensland Government Procurement Policy in a moment, and she will welcome you. But we'll just run through some housekeeping first so that everybody knows where to go to the bathroom. So for anybody here in the room, the bathrooms are out the door to the lifts, and at the end of the lift well, you take a left. So it's basically like a box. So they're kind of located on the other side of that wall if you are not well orientated like myself. And in case of emergency, please follow the Clifton staff who will direct us and everyone in the room to an emergency evacuation point. Obviously, if you're at home and you have an emergency, evacuate yourselves. You're in charge of that, so that will be up to you. And please switch phones to silent if you haven't done that. We understand that people have got to take calls, so we get it. I don't think I clicked hard enough. So settle in today, enjoy yourselves, listen to our speakers who are so generous in donating their time to us today. And there's also a question and answer function in the Teams chat as well. Send that through, and after each of the speakers, they'll have their question and answer. So, but don't worry if you think of a question later. You can still send it through and we can follow up when we send the email with the link around with the video. So this is a strong click. So today we have our regular speaker. So we have Jeremy, and he will be talking about, Jeremy Souder, Director of Procurement Advisory with Gartner, and he will talk about the journey to responsible sourcing. And next up we have our next theme is modern slavery applied to an organisation, and Daria Toshi, who is the Senior Category Manager of modern slavery at Griffith University, will be joined by Bruce Payne, Senior Category Manager for modern slavery at Griffith University, and they will talk to the changes that they've made at Griffith. And then we have the lovely Elizabeth Lett from Arc Blue, and she will talk to you today about ethics in public procurement. She's the Regional Director of Arc Blue for Queensland and the Northern Territory. And then I'll introduce you now to the lovely Sharon Bailey. I don't know if Sharon, I think I need to step off so that Sharon can stand in the camera shot here. So Sharon Bailey is our wonderful colleague for Queensland Government Procurement Policy at the Department of Energy and Public Works. She's our Deputy Director General. And she has been working with Energy and Public Works since 2019, and she has a strong track record in collaborating with both senior leaders and broadly within the Queensland Public Service. And Sharon has responsibility for Queensland procurement policy and associated frameworks, and has high-level oversight for over $2.2 billion in sector-wide supply arrangements that create value for the government and support local economies and the environment. Thank you so much, Sharon Bailey. It's a strong click, Sharon.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and it's great to be here, everyone. Always lovely to come to a community of practice. There's such positive events and a great opportunity for us to connect with our procurement people. As Lauren said, over 430 people registered online and in the room. Just terrific to have people and have that opportunity to talk. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on whose many lands we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It is terrific to have you all here in the room. Since our last community of practice in March, a number of really important things have happened. Firstly, we had our second Buyers Awards, and I know the team saw so many fantastic nominations and great examples of good public sector procurement. We only could award a number of winners, but we actually have some in the room today, which is terrific. But I'll just run you through those awards. So the winner of the Excellence in Delivering on the Objectives of QPP was Sophie Kavanagh from the Department of Environment and Science. And our highly commended was the TMR team for their work on personal and protective equipment. In terms of the excellence in delivering on the objectives of the QPP for a large team, our procurement services team in the Department of Environment Service for their capability uplift and engagement program. Highly commended was the health technology equipment replacement team in Queensland Health. In terms of excellence in delivering on the objectives of QPP for leadership, we have this person in the room, and he will be speaking today. So Bruce Payne from Griffith University, and highly commended was Sean Baker from TMR. In terms of innovation in procurement, the winner was someone from my own Department of Energy and Public Works, the team that looked after the modern methods of construction, which is going to be really critical in meeting a whole range of the housing needs and other construction needs for the state over the future. And highly commended was the collaborative agile procurement for the prototype of reflective raised pavement markers in TMR. A huge diversity of procurement activities there. And I'd also like to mention TMR's work on early engagement and collaborative contracting, which was another really outstanding nomination. So some great examples of excellence there. And I hope people are thinking about what they might want to submit for next year's Buyers Awards program. The other couple of things that I think are really exciting in our space is that we have now released by Queensland 2023, which is the 2023 Queensland Procurement Strategy and Queensland Procurement Policy. Now you'll see they are an evolution of the policy framework, and I think it's really exciting. This has been a huge time of reform over the last 5 to 6 years. These documents consolidate that reform and streamline it and make it easier to follow, I think. And so I think delivering on that practice of continuing to make buying and supplying to the Queensland government a little bit easier and clearly articulating that value add that we're expecting. That value for money includes not only price, but all the other things that we know procurement can be a really significant lever for in delivering on objectives for the community. And we're going to be talking about some of that, of course, today in terms of ethical supply. So I think you'll notice some significant changes. Those policy and frameworks have evolved a little bit over the last 5 to 6 years. What you'll see in the new procurement policy is it's structured to follow the procurement process. And I think that just makes it a lot easier to follow and to deliver on. So at each point in the procurement process, you'll see what are the relevant frameworks and what guidance can you access to help you deliver on some of those broader promises of procurement. There was a webinar, and I know a number of you logged on to that webinar for the buyers. There was also a suppliers webinar. That's up on the net, and we're happy to circulate the links for that if you haven't yet seen it. But it was a great opportunity to walk through the procurement strategy and policy in a little bit more detail and take questions and answers. And now, of course, speaking of questions and answers, today really gets its uplift when people have good questions that allows the speakers and the team to work through some of the intricacies of procurement. So please, this is an interactive session. We're very keen for you to engage with it and to log your questions so that we can get that discussion going. The other really exciting initiative in the procurement area is that we are in the process of replacing Q tenders and the associated systems. And you might have seen on Monday, we've announced that we have been to market and we are now engaging with Local Buy, who are part of the LGAQ's platform. We will work with Local Buy to develop the new Q Tenders platform, which I think is really exciting. It's terrific for us on a number of levels. That's a great platform. We know it's easier, much easier to use than our current frameworks. We know that it has already been used by over 50 local councils across the state. We know that a lot of our suppliers already have a supplier profile on there. And very importantly, in terms of IT systems, for all of you who procure IT systems, it's a trusted system. It's working, it's got assurance. So the risk of working and developing a new system on that base is much less than it otherwise would be. So we're just thrilled with the partnership. We see this as a long-term partnership and relationship management. So it's more than just a procurement. We're in there in a relationship in trying to make sure that we are easier to supply to across the two tiers of government, which I think is really exciting. So how that will play out is we will start by starting to register suppliers. They will have a one-stop shop, a Tell Us Once supplier portal where people will be able to register their profile, uplift their insurances, etc., etc. And that will be what they do once. They're not going to have to do that every time that they tender, which I think is a really welcome thing. It will also make it easier for you as buyers to find people through that supplier portal. So we will start by getting people to register their supplier profiles, and then come towards November, December, we'll start to migrate agencies across to that platform. And hopefully by the end of 24, all of our government agencies will be migrated onto that platform. We will continue Q Tenders, of course, until that point as a dual platform, again, making sure we have our risk systems up and running well. But I think it's a really exciting development, and we will be very keen to work with you to make that as good as it possibly can be. So that's a watch this space. It's coming. And you'll hear more about that in the Growing Queensland roadshows, which will be coming in October and November. So today, now that we move back on to today, as Lauren said, today's theme is modern slavery and ethical considerations. So we're keen to give you insights on how to identify modern slavery and help you deal with those changing requirements, not only through the framework and through our wonderful speakers, but also we've got people who are doing it. And so to giving those hints about when you're doing it on the ground. I think everyone agrees we want to be buying from ethical suppliers. We want to ensure that we do not have modern slavery in our supply chains, but it can feel a bit overwhelming as to how to do that. And that's what today's all about, to try and give you some tips about how to do that as well as you can. Our guest speakers will answer questions after every segment, so please, as I said, continue to log those questions. I'm really looking forward to how this all plays out and getting some feedback. The first speaker, of course, who's someone who we use regularly at these forums, and I'm so sorry, I haven't been using the clicker after having been told. I wasn't sure if I could press that or not. I didn't want to miss. Sorry, everyone. Get carried away with talking. So it's my delight to welcome back Jeremy Souder from Gartner, who is always such an incredible and informed voice of expertise in procurement at these community of practices. As many of you know, Jeremy is director of his procurement advisor of the Gartner Procurement Advisory Team and supports many clients across Australia, but also internationally. So Jeremy's going to talk to us a little bit today about how some organisations have implemented this framework and the key elements for success if we're looking at a responsible sourcing system. It's now with pleasure that I hand over to Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Sharon. As always, everyone, appreciate your time today. Why are we here today to talk about responsible sourcing? Well, increasingly, we have these complex, globalized supply chains, meaning that responsible sourcing risks, things like labor exploitation, environmental pollution, unsafe working conditions, these things can all go undetected. And we as procurement leaders, we as procurement organizations across the government have a really crucial role to play in implementing responsible sourcing strategies to identify but also correct for these poor practices and really encourage our suppliers to limit things like environmental impacts, things like greenhouse gas emissions. For us in Queensland government, we have to focus on, of course, modern slavery. We have to focus on the Australian Payment Times Reporting Scheme. We have to focus on, of course, the Buy Queensland strategy and policy Sharon mentioned. Growing Queensland, we have to focus on helping the Queensland government achieve its climate action plan. And globally, there's an incredible surge of interest and investment in sustainability and responsible sourcing initiatives. Now, when we talk about sustainability at Gartner, what we mean is this light blue box here at the top of the page. It's the balance of short, medium and long-term outcomes across both environmental and social, as well as profitability impacts. So responsible sourcing is really taking the sustainability initiatives of our organizations and passing some of that responsibility through to our supply base. And those organizations that we do business with, and 75% of organizations in a recent Gartner survey told us that they have a formalized responsible sourcing program. I'm sure many of you do, maybe some of you don't currently or haven't been involved in that. But to add to that, 92% of organizations told us they plan to increase investments in sustainability moving forward. Obviously, that goes without saying, that's obviously fantastic. But when we think about global organizations, not just Queensland government, we look at the pressure as to where this pressure to invest in sustainability initiatives is coming from. And quite frankly, it's coming from everywhere, right? We asked organizations globally, who are the top 3 stakeholder groups that are putting pressure on us to invest in sustainability, right? And of course, I'm sure it's no surprise that for the typical organization, it's customers, but it's not just customers, right? For some, it's investors. It's of course government agencies. I'm sure for us in Queensland government, there's obviously, political, drive to invest in sustainability and responsible sourcing. Of course, our own employees want us to be doing this because it's the right thing to do. The challenge is that all of these stakeholders have different expectations of our organizations. I think it's pretty obvious why this matters to us here in procurement. It's because procurement owns this, right? I don't think it's any surprise to anyone here that almost 70% of procurement organizations are likely to own responsible sourcing as part of that wider sustainability initiative, right? And we'll discuss over the next few pages that programs will be limited if we think about this in a silo. This really requires collaboration with internal stakeholders, with suppliers, in some case, third parties, industry associations, even, auditors, etc. And this isn't necessarily an easy task. And when we survey, and what we know from our research is that these programs do tend to be somewhat limited today when we look across organizations globally. When we're looking at the percentage here of organizations who agreed to basically 3 main enablers of a strong responsible sourcing program, starting on the left, right? Are we resourced for long-term success? Only a third agree or strongly agree with that. Do we excel at driving adherence to your suppliers for responsible sourcing policies? Again, only about 4 in 10, feel that. And then is it embedded into our culture? And again, only about a third are saying agree or strongly agree there. So I would argue that last point is probably the most important challenge we have to overcome to then build the case both internally and externally to drive success in responsible sourcing. So what we'll do now, we'll look at a few key elements of what goes into a successful responsible sourcing program. And procurement organizations can improve the effectiveness of their responsible sourcing strategy. If we think about the top of the page here, we need to define the scope and the objective that we want to achieve here. In the next few pages, I'm going to show you a really handy framework to really help you to decide on the scope and the objectives for your responsible sourcing program. Then we want to think about really, I suppose, assessing opportunities for collaboration and embedding responsible sourcing into the end-to-end, supplier lifecycle management, and really thinking about, driving that both with our internal partners and external suppliers as well. So these are the key elements that procurement leaders really must be taking into account when defining their responsible sourcing strategies. Would very much, encourage you to sort of, tear this out or really think through these questions with your teams internally. And essentially, these are the questions to ask ourselves when setting out to develop this strategy. I appreciate, I'm sure many of you already have a responsible sourcing strategy, but for those that don't, it's a great starting point. So when we think about the first box there, that idea of the scope of the program, we really have to be thinking about materiality. And so what do we mean by materiality? Well, it's really quite simply, it's the level of importance we place on certain things. So these are the issues that are most critical to our organization, to our stakeholders, right? Materiality is going to effectively inform what initiatives you actually take on as part of your responsible sourcing program. And I'll show you that in just a few slides, but we need to think about how the materiality of different elements of the program play into how we define success of our program. So, when we think about the traditional definitions of success for procurement, we used to, of course, see over and over again, cost, quality, service, cost, quality, service, right? These dominate our dashboards. We in procurement are, globally evaluated largely with things like savings targets. And, let me be clear here, I'm not suggesting that that's going to go away ever, right? But we'll always have those savings targets to some extent on our back. But it's more the idea that we need to expand the way we define success. And, as Sharon mentioned there, certainly that's happening in Queensland government, which is fantastic to see. And we in procurement will have to as well, really think about what our definitions of success are if we want to build a strong responsible sourcing program for our organizations. And increasingly, organizations are realizing that these three are not the only measures of value, and really, that's a function of the material concerns you see around this circle. So these are very, very well accepted, very common materiality categories, right? Every framework that is used by organizations will be a little bit different, but this is specifically taken from a global organization, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. It's now called the Value Reporting Framework. It's been picked up by a lot of organizations, and really starting at 11 o'clock, I suppose, on the page here, and going clockwise, we have social capital. So this is things like, of course, human rights. This is where you'd see, of course, modern slavery come into things like, customer privacy. Obviously, that includes things like GDPR globally and, data privacy rights, etc. We have leadership and governance. So this is about our business ethics as organizations. Then we have business model and innovation. So for some organizations, this might be things like, are we being responsible when it comes to the way we design products so that they last 20 years, not 3 years, and we're having to upgrade them because they basically fall apart or miraculously don't work after an update, right? And then we have at the bottom here, human capital. So again, this is thinking about our labor practices, our diversity and inclusion practices. And then of course, a huge one is environment, right? So not just greenhouse gas emissions, but it could be waste, hazardous materials, the ecological impacts we're having on the environment as well. So of course, under each of these categories are a variety of initiatives that organizations are taking on within their sustainability programs, and within procurement, within their responsible sourcing strategies as well. And I think what's important to know is that all responsible sourcing programs come in different shapes and sizes. No one organization I've ever seen globally has the exact same responsible sourcing program or strategy. What you'll see here is you want to define your program using, I suppose, one of these 3 levels in this pyramid, right? That's based on your own organization's ambition. And this is, what we see on the left-hand side at the bottom of the pyramid is where we focus initially on risk avoidance, right? With compliance moving to the top, which is obviously going beyond what's required of you, right? So moving up this pyramid from compliance to having a more and more positive impact, right? Having a positive impact, not on just abiding by regulations, but also, thinking about more of the environmental and the social externalities of our business practices, right? Going beyond the bare minimum. So if I go into each of these a little bit further, when we think about the bottom there, compliance, well, that's all of our jobs, right? We have to meet legal obligations as defined by whether it be, local government, state government, obviously our federal government, global regulations, right, that we have to abide by. And quite simply, this is to basically keep the lights on. Without doing this, we may not be able to stay in business as organizations, right? You certainly don't want to have forced labor in your supply chain. And this can sometimes be hard, right? Especially for organizations in highly regulated industries. Certainly some organizations say, for now, this is actually where we want to stop with our program. We want to make sure we're meeting these minimum compliances, and in the future we have ambitions to go higher, but we need to focus on just getting this bit right first, right? But we can take a step further, of course. We can look to stand out, to be what we'd call a market differentiator as an organization. So you're really taking more of those stakeholder views to your priorities. So, let's say the bottom of the page here, we've got, compliance. Are we giving a minimum wage, or are our suppliers giving a minimum wage? That would be a compliance check at the bottom. So, organizations out there, one, for example, globally that we work with, Unilever, they make public statements, not just about minimum wage, but a living wage for not just their employees, but for their suppliers' employees, right? And then at the top of the page here, you've got ecosystem enablement. So working with your peers, as you are all doing here, obviously, governments tend to be more collaborative on this front, but even, for some organizations, their competitors, to make sure that you are advancing your agendas with suppliers, but also moving the needle on these key material issues that one organization can't simply do alone, right? So thinking about industry associations, we see these across the globe, in different industries, manufacturing, chips, beverages, you name it. Even organizations that compete coming together to support the same outcomes, right? And there's plenty of initiatives across each level for you to choose from, right? So I've just put up on the screen here just some examples at the different levels across, the 2 major responsible sourcing, I suppose, pillars, environmental and social. You don't have to sit at one level. You can take initiatives from all three layers, right? You can start at compliance, but as we sort of focus on heavily in government, for example, you have there things like supplier diversity, greenhouse gas emissions, obviously, of course, the Queensland Government Climate Action Plan, in Australia, Australian, payment times reporting scheme, etc. Right? So obviously, this covers different levels of this pyramid when we think about the things that we're focused on collectively. And what's really interesting is when we survey organizations globally, to be honest, the programs are still largely driven by compliance. We are seeing organizations move up the pyramid fairly quickly, but for the most part, it is still largely driven by that compliance part, right? Meeting obligations legally for a start, and then moving up towards more ambitious outcomes, right, from programs. So, we've talked about materiality. We've talked about levels of ambition. We also have to talk about the depth of your strategy, which is, obviously very heavily reliant on the amount of resourcing you have, right? So I'm going to share, what we typically see organizations doing, fully expecting that some organizations may be better resourced to go to this extent. Others may be thinking, we don't necessarily have the bodies to throw at doing this, or the technologies, or the third parties to support. But when we think about how you're going to engage your supply base, we think about from left to right that the levels of engagement with our supply base, from very little engagement with our suppliers. You can start with, including responsible sourcing just basically into your code of conduct as part of working with you in Queensland government, or a separate responsible sourcing policy that sits outside of just the standard code of conduct. Obviously, you can publish it on your website. You can give it to suppliers during onboarding, or even make it a qualification thing, right, to comply. And once we set out expectations, we can determine which of these suppliers might be at risk of not being able to abide by the code of conduct, right? So maybe prioritizing suppliers by impact on some of those material risks, right? So suppliers who are high risk, maybe we send them a supplier self-assessment a few times a year. Maybe we do supplier audits. We build in, remediation action plans where necessary. And this is where we're starting to really get towards more and more collaboration with suppliers, as it says there, right? So maybe mentoring or partnering with suppliers, of course, to develop those action plans. And, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, is that it's that simply setting expectations with a code of conduct, published, is not enough for organizations globally anymore. The reality is that there are probably issues somewhere in our supply chains, especially if we have thousands of suppliers, and they of course have thousands of suppliers, right? It gets harder and harder when we get to what we'd call sort of those sub tiers of our supply chain. But we need to be able to think through and explain that, to a stakeholder, right? If an issue is discovered, what did we do to prevent that issue, to identify it and to mitigate it? And of course, more engagement does mean that more resources will have to be aligned. So it's really about sort of picking that appropriate level of engagement with our suppliers. And as you are doing, right, collaboration within Queensland government to try to streamline this, obviously, is much more scalable than organizations, doing this one by one alone, right? So if you have a supplier code of conduct, right, this is a part of your normal supplier relationship management process. You don't necessarily need dedicated FTEs over here on the left. But when we start to look at things like risk assessments, identifying those material risks, right, that's maybe where we have, say, a procurement center of excellence that's doing some of this work, or maybe category managers. Some organizations might even have, support from their risk departments. But really trying to make this achievable, but also not doing it to the extent that onboarding becomes incredibly burdensome for suppliers. They almost give up and say, well, other customers aren't putting me through this. I'm going to go basically and go and focus on them, right? So really, we do have to strike that balance about doing this, but also doing this efficiently to enable suppliers to, of course, engage with us effectively, right? So, I'm conscious of time. Of course, I know, we did start a few minutes late and do want to leave a few moments for Q&A. One of the things you'll see in follow-up to today's meeting is you will see these slides. There are some great case studies in there, organizations like Vodafone that you'll see, just around what they sort of do when it comes to responsible sourcing elements, how they build it into different parts of the supplier life cycle, right? So when it comes to contracting, for example, Vodafone has an initiative where 20% of their total supplier selection criteria is based on the commitment of the supplier to diversity and environment. So to one of Sharon's earlier points around when we think about value, going beyond just cost and actually really weighting those other factors as part of supplier selection. We're definitely seeing this also in some of the progressive public listed global entities. We also have examples from BMW as well to share. So they give their suppliers sustainability self-assessments during the contracting or the selection phase, and they actually ask the suppliers to provide them with their greenhouse gas emissions calculations. Let's be realistic. Is that going to be realistic for all of your suppliers, particularly your small medium enterprises in, I don't know, Northwest Queensland? Probably not, but certainly starting to incorporate responsible sourcing into your selection criteria is a really, really important step as well to really driving the right behaviors from suppliers. So with that, might sort of end there and just give enough time for any questions, and just some things on the screen here for you to consider coming out of today's session, some to-dos or some things to consider. But otherwise, I think that's a good place to stop.
Again.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out, when you go up from the addressing compliance and then you go up that ladder, what's the cost that's going to be involved to actually go up further with the suppliers in your research?
Good question. So we don't necessarily have any sort of calculations on the cost internally. Obviously, there might be a cost in the level of resourcing you align to responsible sourcing, maybe going from no dedicated FTEs to actually having within, say, a center of excellence, a responsible sourcing expert. Maybe it's starting to use supplier sustainability applications that are out there. There are many nowadays, your EcoVadis's and the like, that can support you on some of those elements of organizations, I suppose, greenhouse gas emissions and thinking about things like, rolling out, more, I suppose, proactive supplier diversity expectations with suppliers, right? So there's not necessarily compliance that, suppliers must use a certain, diversity of supply base, but in terms of, driving those behaviors that we want to see that will drive, better external outcomes, that's obviously going to have to be built into your values as an organization. You're going to have to get buy-in from stakeholders. So organizations will typically find that investment in the applications or the technology to support moving up the curve, dedicated FTE, or at least building it more into the expectations of their category managers, even in some cases, reducing workloads of staff to free up time to focus on this as part of their wider responsibilities. I'm sure there will be costs associated with that. The more you can scale it, some organizations, as I mentioned, are turning to industry associations to try and scale their movement up the pyramid. Others are turning to third-party auditors, so not necessarily going and doing these audits all themselves, actually saying, look, maybe we're actually satisfied with third-party audits of suppliers, meeting these expectations we have. That might be the bar that we set for proof of them, achieving our greenhouse gas emission expectations or achieving our waste reduction expectations or water stewardship expectations, right? So unfortunately to that question, I don't have a specific cost answer for you, but you can see how the people element and the technology element, may involve further investment. Is that realistic for all organizations? No. Is that why maybe some of them stay at compliance? I'm guessing yes. So even if it's the right thing to do, it's not necessarily what we see play out in practice.
Thanks, Jeremy. Does anybody else have any questions within the room? Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. We'll move on. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent. Where do you put a spare microphone? That's the question. Is this one? Yeah. Okay, sorry, I can't see it. So, thank you very much, Jeremy. That has been really insightful. And if anybody else does need to send through questions on the chat, please continue to do so, and we'll answer them at a later stage. So that's actually a really good segue, that Jeremy's discussion, into our next speakers. So next we have Daria Toshi and Bruce Payne from Griffith University, and they will be talking about modern slavery applied to the organisation. So Daria is the anti-slavery lead at Griffith University, and she has a wealth of experience in human rights over a decade within her field across Europe, Asia, Latin America, Australasia, in both private and not-for-profit sectors. So she has worked with the Walt Disney Company, Unilever, which is great that Jeremy mentioned that, so maybe we can thank you for that, Daria, in some way. KPMG and other international organisations like the Royal Tropical Institute and the International Training Centre of the International Labour Organisation, so extensive experience in this field. Let me turn that off. That's better. Daria's diverse experiences have allowed her to collaborate in cross-functional teams and lead multi-stakeholder initiatives that prioritise ethical standards, workers' rights, and the prevention of human exploitation in global supply chains. She's played a pivotal role in advancing human rights in global supply chains while creating brand value. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Daria today. But joining her is Bruce Payne, also from Griffith University, and he's the head of strategic procurement and supply, and he's an accomplished business professional with extensive expertise in procurement and supply management. He's adept in leading transformative initiatives, and that has been well documented, such as through the award that Bruce won earlier this year. And that award was the Buy Queensland Buyer Awards Award for Leadership. So I'm really looking forward to what Daria and Bruce have to say. Welcome to the stage. Thank you.
So good to be with everybody, and what a privilege to talk on such an important topic today. So from the agenda, you'll see we'll try and share a little bit of this Griffith story and some of the experiences we've had, our challenges, as well as some of the things that we've been able to do to achieve some success. By way of introduction, and here my watch is buzzing. By way of introduction, what I might tell you, when after the Modern Slavery Act came into effect in 1st of January 2019, Griffith's first thing was, gee, what does the Act imply? What do we have to do? And we got legal advice. We progressed to a point then when we started working with the other universities, trying to figure out who was doing what. And we realized as a sector, we'd collaborated on other things, and we realized that if we collaborated on modern slavery, we could probably benefit from the joint resources, but we could also have a better impact when it came to supply chains. Many of the university sector use the same suppliers because of the nature of some of the things that we do. So that's the AUPN, Australian, or it's now Australasian University Procurement Network collaboration. So we did a fair bit of that. And then at some point we realized if we really want to achieve the things that we had that were aligned with our values. Griffith's a very values-based organization. It's not an elitist organization. We do great things, and in some things we're top 10 in the world, and in other things we're top 200 university, but we really are values-based. And Griffith decided, hang on, if we're really going to live by our values and walk the talk, we're going to need to put some dedicated resource into tackling this whole modern slavery human rights initiative. So we went out to market, and I was delighted when we discovered Daria, and we've had the privilege of having Daria bring all her years of expertise, and you heard a little bit about it. So without any further ado, what I'll do is hand over to Daria, and she'll take you through some of our experiences that hopefully you'll find interesting and you might find quite useful, and we're happy to share afterwards. I'll close with a few thoughts at the end. Thanks, Daria.
Thank you, Bruce. So thank you, Bruce, and I'm very happy to be here. So thank you so much for being here. Before taking you through the journey we went through, I'd like to start from the basics and talk a little bit about modern slavery. So I think that all of us have an understanding of what modern slavery is. So can I ask you, which is the first word that comes to mind when you think of modern slavery? Sweatshops. Sorry, sweatshops, yeah. Absolutely, coercion. Anything else? Sorry? Absolutely, all excellent words. Because modern slavery, now this is my first challenge here. Okay, it is a situation where a person is exploited by another individual or an organization for commercial or personal gains. And the key element is the lack of freedom. The person who is exploited cannot set themselves free because they are forced, coerced, or they're tricked. According to the Australian government, modern slavery is an umbrella term that includes 8 forms of criminal exploitations. And the most common ones are trafficking in person, forced labor, and forced marriage. Another try. Okay. Yeah, they told me not to be too enthusiastic. So. But how big is the issue? So how many people do you think are estimated to live in modern slavery nowadays in the world? Do you have a number in mind? Close to 50 million? Nobody else? How many? 500 million, okay. You was right. Well, actually, you were right. So it is 50 million, of which 28 million live in forced labor, 22 in forced marriage. 55% of the total victims are based in the Asia Pacific, and 54% of the total victims are women and girls, not surprisingly, unfortunately. How about Australia? What do you think? How many people live in modern slavery? Yeah. 12,000? 12,000, okay, optimistic. Anybody else? 41,000. And the most common forms of modern slavery are, first of all, actually forced marriage is the most common form of modern slavery in Australia, forced labor, and commercial sexual exploitation. And this is not it, because we do import a wide variety of products from overseas that are tainted with modern slavery. And to make things even worse, according to the ILO, the International Labour Organization, the number of victims between 2016 and 2021 increased by 2.7 million. Yeah, wow. So what is the world doing about that? So governments around the world have started to issue legislations, regulations, directives to hold companies responsible for the working conditions of the people employed in their operations and supply chains. And all those measures, including our Modern Slavery Act, are based on the UNGP, the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. A set of guidelines that say, hey company, you have the responsibility to respect internationally recognized human rights, including the right to freedom. And so, with that in mind, in 2022 at Griffith, we reviewed our approach to modern slavery to align our actions more closely with the broader UNGP's framework. And we focused on 5 areas: policy commitment, communicating clearly to our stakeholders our ethical expectations; governance, creating the right environment for our policy commitment to come to life and really be embedded in our culture, as Jeremy said. Jeremy said embedding, and that's exactly what we want to do. Due diligence, responding to our duty to identify and address the risk of modern slavery in our supply chains and operations. Remediation, accounting for any harm to people we might have caused or contributed to. And then finally, issues of context, making any possible efforts to respect human rights wherever we or our suppliers operate or source from. So what does it mean in practice? Policy commitment. We did a few things. We published our modern slavery policy last year, and we started to reference modern slavery in our key frameworks, procedures, and contract templates. We launched our Supplier Code of Conduct, and we also published a webpage, which is called Supplying to Griffith, where suppliers can really find very clearly what our ethical expectations are. If they want to engage with us, they have to be ethical in the way we mean ethical behavior. Governance, that's a big one as well. So the first thing we did was setting up a task force, which is led by our CEO and includes members like our CFO, directors of our key operational units, and as well an external expert, Matt Friedman from the Mekong Club, who provides insights and as well a second line of assurance. We believe in collaboration. We believe that in order to make a change which is impactful, we need to work together and leverage our resources, knowledge and expertise. And that's why we've been working closely with the UPN, but as well we engage with NGOs like the Mekong Club, as I said, but as well Electronics Watch and the Cleaning Accountability Framework. We put a lot of emphasis in building capability for our students and our staff. Again, if we want to be an effective agent of change, people need to know and need to care. So raising awareness is absolutely pivotal to us. And then finally, we developed a modern slavery maturity model. So at the beginning of the year, we faced the challenge of developing a 3-year action plan. And we wanted it to be based on a solid framework that allowed us to draw a baseline, set targets, but as well monitor progress over time. We look at the market, we didn't find anything we really liked, so we developed our model, we workshopped with the Electronics Watch and Mekong Club, and this is what it looks like. It is based on 3 three pillars. It expands on the UNGPs. It refers to 5 stages of maturity, which is very similar to what Jeremy said, right? From compliance to making impact, and then includes a diagnostic tool. As I said, it expands on the UNGPs. So every building block of the UNGP framework contains a number of subcategories, and every subcategory contains a list of actions that define each stage of maturity. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It looks like that. So here we have the UNGPs, we have the stages of maturity, and the actions that belong to each stage of maturity. It is a sort of checklist as well, because it allows us to understand, first of all, to understand where we are, and as well understand what we want to do and what we have to go to get that. I don't have, unfortunately, time to go through the modeling to the details, but if you have any questions afterwards, please come and see me. And then due diligence. Jeremy as well talked about that. So what did we do? What have we done? So first of all, we developed an inherent risk framework to help us setting the right priorities and really help us understand where our resources should go, because and identify where the highest risk is. We started to engage with suppliers in a dynamic way through Inform 365, which is a cloud-based solution owned by a company based in the Gold Coast. And this solution allows us to send out questionnaires to suppliers at different stages of the procurement, of the sourcing cycle, and also share improvement plans. The last thing we want to do is naming and shaming. We want to work with our suppliers. They have challenges, we have challenges. Let's work together, because in the end, we want the same outcome. And then we work closely with the UPN to really advance our approach as a sector. Before moving on, I'd like to pause just a minute on our framework, because it goes beyond the traditional approach based on sector, category, and countries. So we added 2 new dimensions, which are business model and vulnerable population, again, to be able to prioritize our actions. So what we did essentially, we looked at our spend and we asked ourselves a couple of additional questions. First of all, do we interact with high-risk business model? Do our suppliers have control or influence? They know what's happening in their supply chain, yes or no? If the answer is yes, red flag. Next one, do our activities or our suppliers rely on vulnerable populations to deliver a product or a service? And again, if the answer is yes, red flag. And by vulnerable population, we mean migrant workers, minority groups, all groups of societies that traditionally experience barriers to social security. Remediation, that's very important to us. We do have a responsibility to provide access to remedy through a legitimate process. So we developed a procedure that make remediation transparent, accessible, and impartial. For example, here you can see this is a poster that we have just created, and we are going, this is an initiative, it's brand new, I have it on my desk, I have to give it to the right people. We are going to put this poster all in strategic location all across our campuses, so that workers of our subcontractors know how to report a grievance related to exploitation or modern slavery. And if we receive a grievance, we will sit with the right holder and the contractors and find a solution which is the best for everybody. And then that's the last one, issues of context. Human rights are dynamic and they're ever changing. So we do work with organizations, again, Mekong Club, Electronic Swatch, you name them, to stay abreast of any emerging issues so that we can take proper actions and appropriate actions. And to that, we're going now to show you 2 videos. One is about a recent scam, which is ramping and is taking huge proportions, which is called the pig butchering scam. Have you ever heard about it? Nobody? You'll hear about that. And the second video is a call to action. Now, before showing the videos, I need to warn you that they refer to stories of rape, torture, and death. The content is not explicit. It's like you were watching report on the ABC. But still, if at any moment you feel triggered, please feel free to leave the session and come back in 10 minutes or so. If you decide to stay and afterwards you feel any kind of discomfort, know that you can call your employee assistance provider or Lifeline. Okay. Now, do I click again to start the video? Yes. Okay. Sorry?
So, as I'm sure you're all aware, online scams have become an increasing issue over the last few decades. And as technology is advancing, so too are the scams, resulting in an unprecedented rise in cryptocurrency scams over the past few years. According to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, over $10 billion were lost to internet scams in 2022 alone. And with many of the scams going unreported, this figure is likely to be much higher. One of the commonly known scams is the pig butchering scam. I imagine the majority of you here today will have probably received messages from strangers innocently framed as being sent to the wrong number. This could have been an attempt to start a pig butchering scam, whereby the scammer builds up a trusting, even loving relationship with the target before convincing them to invest into a fake investment website or platform, and then they proceed to freeze their wallets and drain their funds. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, online scams have become an increasing issue over the last few decades. And as technology is advancing, so too are the scams, resulting in an unprecedented rise in cryptocurrency scams over the past few years. According to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, over $10 billion were lost to internet scams in.
No, it was the previous one. Right. That's okay. No, that's all right.
So, as I'm sure you're all aware, online scams have become an increasing issue over the last few decades. And as technology is advancing, so too are the scams, resulting in an unprecedented rise in cryptocurrency scams over the past few years. According to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, over $10 billion were lost to internet scams in 2022 alone. And with many of the scams going unreported, this figure is likely to be much higher. One of the commonly known scams is the pig butchering scam. I imagine the majority of you here today will have probably received messages from strangers innocently framed as being sent to the wrong number. This could have been an attempt to start a pig butchering scam, whereby the scammer builds up a trusting, even loving relationship with the target before convincing them to invest into a fake investment website or platform, and then they proceed to freeze their wallets and drain their funds. However, the pig butchering scam and many other types of online scams are often a double-edged sword with victims on both ends. And just a warning, there is a triggering image on the next slide. Since last year, we've witnessed a rise in the new form of human trafficking, fueling online scams, whereby victims are lured into compounds across Southeast Asia, commonly in Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and the Philippines. These individuals are then forced to scam others from across the globe, and they'll often be beaten, electrocuted, or face other methods of torture if they refuse to comply or perform badly in their scamming operations. The victims come from a range of backgrounds, many being English-speaking professionals and students educated to degree level. Currently, we've identified victims from over 20 different countries, including China, the US, Brazil, Ethiopia, Russia, and the UK. And the list of victim sending countries is ever increasing. In fact, this map that on the screen is actually already outdated. Many of the victims are lured in through fake job advertisements on platforms such as Facebook, WhatsApp, and Telegram, or they'll be recommended the job by a friend or a relative. Some do go voluntarily to conduct the scams, but once they are there, they're often held against their will and face the same violence. Victims in the compounds are given numerous mobile phones and computers to be used for the scamming, as well as a script put together using psychological tactics to entice the scam targets. Victims are sold between the different companies that operate within the compounds, often for upwards of $1,000 US, and there have also been reports of victims being sold with USDT, a digital currency. On the screen here, you can see screenshots from open Telegram group chats used to buy and sell human beings, or put out bounties for people who have escaped from the compounds, and to share scam scripts and tactics, such as how to brainwash, how to build trust, and the manipulative conversation tactics for female targets. As the publication will demonstrate, technology is leveraged in multiple ways to allow the criminals to evade detection. Within the compounds, this includes the use of international internet cables, and the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, who we have with us today, conducted a geofencing operation to identify the location of IP addresses surrounding the compounds. Here we have a map of a compound in Myanmar, where it was discovered that the majority of the IP addresses were actually located in Thailand. VPNs are also used along with other means to mass detection. Throughout the scams, deepfake is often used to deceive targets, along with other forms of AI. Financial flows are also easily hidden and diverted with the use of technology, and our panel discussion today, as well as the publication itself, will allow us to hear from the experts themselves on this. As we can see, this crime is a complex issue impacting millions of people across the globe. And behind the losses of these scams that are now in the billions of dollars are real people who are suffering daily, even facing death. With such a complex issue, a collaborative response is needed between law enforcement, survivors, NGOs, governments, private sector, finance, and the tech industry. Today, our panel will provide the latest updates on this crime and a discussion on the potential means for combating this fast-growing issue. Thank you. I'll now go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Bruce, would you like to come up?
So just in closing, I wanted to share this last 2-minute video, and then there's a final slide with the final thought. We had Matt from the Mekong Club come and do an online presentation for some people at Griffith just this past week. And this final story really touched me and made me think, because often in the world you wonder, you know, can you make a difference and how can you make a difference? And this 2-minute segment will give a bit of a view from Matt, who's been doing this for 30 years now, and he's an amazing person and an amazing resource with great knowledge. It had a blue light flash. Yeah, probably try.
My last slide, I just want to state kind of my philosophical perspective related to this as a person who's been working on this for 32 years. So years ago, when I was a public health officer, I was in Nepal working on this topic. I desperately wanted to do something to address the issue of modern slavery, so I decided I was going to write a book. As part of this process, I went from shelter to interview the women and the girls who were in sex trafficking who would come back. And I went to one shelter, and there was a girl named Kita. And every time I approached her, she said, no, I don't want to give my story. But as I was finishing or doing these interviews, she would sit there and listen to all the interviews that were taking place. When I finished at that shelter and I was leaving, Kita comes running up and says, I changed my mind. You can have my story. So over a 3-hour period, she described one of the worst situations I had heard of rape and torture and disease and murder and betrayal. It was the worst story I'd ever heard. I honestly didn't know what to say to this young girl. Finally, I turned to her and I said, wow, Kita, you must be so angry at the traffickers for the horrific things they did to you. She paused and paused And she said, no, I'm angry at you and you and you. She pointed at us. She said, where were you? Said that every single day she prayed for people to come and help her. Nobody came. Said that she went to school till she was 12. She knew that everything that was happening around here was right out in the open. She said she wasn't angry at the traffickers. She said that, you know, they're just bad people being bad people. She said she was angry at the good people, at society, for allowing a 15-year-old girl to be commercially raped 7,000 times only to get AIDS and she was dying. Now, I tell this story because Geeta pretty much called us all out. She recognized that the 25, 30,000 people like me are insufficient to make a difference. For the rural to really address this issue, they have to understand the problem, and everyone needs to take a stake in the fact that we as human beings need to contribute to this. So how can you do that? You can raise awareness, you can learn about this, you can tell your friends and family, you can be volunteers, you can donate. There are many things that can be done. But that's a discussion for another day. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much. And I'll pass it over to the organizers now.
So interesting thought about what you can do and Matt's call to action. What's interesting, at one of our meetings that the task force had, one of the chaps on our executive asked Matt, and he said, Matt, are you seeing anything change because of what everybody's doing, because of the Modern Slavery Act and pressure being put by major brands on supply chains and the manufacturing in places across Asia, etc.? And he said, are you seeing any difference? And it was interesting because Matt said they are seeing some good news stories. Not all exploitation is as sinister as some of the stories you've heard. Some of it is as simple as freedoms with passports being taken, and I say not as sinister, it's pretty terrible, but they're starting to see some changes with big global brands having customers putting pressure. They're putting pressure through their supply chains, and they're starting to see a difference. So the final thought I would leave with you is we can make a difference, even if it's something small. And I think Matt's call to action is a great one. Doria and I are happy to share. We're still on a learning curve. If you think we can learn something, please share with us. We're happy to share after this. And please, everybody, do your bit and let's make the world a better place. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Thanks. I have a question. How are you measuring the success of what you're doing in terms of addressing modern slavery? Like, what's success look like for you after, you know, the first year and second year and third year?
How I measure success? Griffith won't need me anymore. That's really my objective. So modern slavery considerations will be embedded in the DNA of the university, and everybody will know what to do. And they won't need anybody like me setting up the right tools and setting up the right environment for really the commitment to become alive. That's what success looks like to me. I don't know you, Bruce.
Yes, and some of it's about education of people and the number of people are being educated. Some of it is about putting policies and procedures and things in place. And that maturity model that we developed was for that very purpose. How do you know when you've done the right thing, and how do you know when you're succeeding? Some of it has been when we're getting responses back from suppliers, because we get suppliers to fill in questionnaires and then say, well, based on that questionnaire, you fit this risk profile. Will you work with us? And when we're getting positive responses, they're prepared to fill in our questionnaire. That we treat as success. So we've got the maturity model, which is giving us some guidance. We've still got to finalize some really good measures, but all the crude ones we have at the moment are the ones about education, seeing the positive. We also track how people review our modern slavery statements and see whether we're getting, year one, we got rave reviews. Year two, we were down the pack again because everybody's catching on. So we haven't perfected the measures, but we are measuring some things across a raft of things. Even recognizing that it's not just our supply chain, and getting people engaged internally across the university has been great. The number of times Daria has been asked to present. Daria's built a program that can be used to educate students and will be used. So there's a lot of things, little bits of success.
And also asking to our stakeholders, how we're doing. So just to really understand whether we're doing is effective, because the last thing we want to do is do something because we need to tick a box. We really want to make an impact. So for example, with Inform 365, we started to use it, and our idea is to send out a survey to our suppliers who have been engaged through the system, to really receive feedback and say, does it work? Or is there anything that you could recommend us? So it is a journey. And I really think that education is key, but once everybody is aware and takes action, really everything we do will be embedded into the fabric of the university, and it will be business as usual. And that's really, for me, what success looks like.
I have a follow-up. Sorry, I guess I was kind of wondering, would you measure success based on, for example, if you've identified a supplier as being quite high risk, that based on your remedial action plan, for example, that you've done with them, that they've now moved from high to medium risk because they've changed some practices? And is that what you would see as being a successful impact at the ground level of what's happening to people?
Absolutely, yeah, that would be a measure of success, yeah. Because the idea is we want to work with our suppliers, we want to make an impact across our supply chain. So absolutely spot on, yeah.
And that's where organizations like the Electronics Watch and the Mekong Club have given us great guidance about how to engage and not be confrontational, to actually work with suppliers, because then you get the change on the ground for people whose lives are actually affected by this. So that's the ultimate success.
Thank you. I might go over to this side of the room.
Thank you. Hello, Haig Topalian from Arc Blue. On one of the earlier slides, I saw solar panels were mentioned, and I know Griffiths has invested heavily in solar farms. So interested to know how Griffiths has kind of navigated that within their organisation around potential competing dynamics around sustainability and modern slavery.
Yeah, do you want to take this one? Because this is a hot topic.
It's a really good one.
Yeah.
And this, at the moment, our panels that we've bought come from the same places where there's a lot of issue. One of our other universities has found some supply in Germany, actually, which is doesn't have the same issues, but by the time we discovered that, we'd already made those investments. Interestingly, I attended a session where Electronics Watch said, you know, if you need phones, if you need some of those things, the strategy is to buy what you need, but if you've got no option, and then to work with those organizations. And it's interesting, we get positive reaction from some of the suppliers, and other suppliers that we've tried to engage in the electronics sector have not been in the technology, have not been very conducive. Electronics Watch is a great organization because they give voice and bring people together from lots of organizations. So we're working closely with Electronics Watch. I won't mention the name, but there's a large technology provider that is one of our suppliers, and I'd guarantee suppliers at least 50% or more of the organizations represented here. And we're working with the Electronics Watch. So it's not a perfect science, and solar panels is a great example. And, you know, do you pay more if you can find it? Or, you know, how do you work when you've really got no other option, because that's a technology you need. So we haven't perfected that.
But it's also about working with others, because it's difficult to change things alone. So we have been working with the UPN as well, because other universities have the same thing, and we are trying to define the best approach. So one approach could be also do a deep dive to really understand what the issues are, at which point of the supply chains, for example, so to be able to influence that. And there are also other initiatives that are popping up with focus on solar panels, and definitely we will look into them as well. But that's a really important point. This was one of the first things that we discussed as well in the task force. It's great for the environment, but how about the supply chain of are we doing good to people by doing that? So yeah.
Thank you. I'll ask one more question and then we will go to the next speaker. We are running out of time, but this question actually segues really well into the next speaker. What is Griffith University's thoughts on prison labour where it's offered as a choice to work? Would you consider this as modern slavery? I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got the question.
Do you want to read it again?
Yeah, please.
What are your thoughts on prison labour where it's offered as a choice to work? Would you consider this as modern slavery?
It is. This is what is called, state-imposed forced labour. It is. It is considered. It's not just by us, but it is state-imposed forced labour. That's what it is.
No, that's a good response. Sorry, there is one more from over here. This came in online, so whoever wants has submitted that. It's anonymous.
Can I just say that there are options for inmates to actually work for private companies and get paid, but it is not forced. It is actually a choice of the inmates to actually do that work. So it's a
training program.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is...
Okay, sorry, then I misunderstood the question.
It's not a state. It's not a state.
Okay, sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Utilise inmates to give them a certificate in manufacturing or something else as well. So just to re-enter the workforce and have some kind of background when they come out.
In.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't consider that.
Very much, but it is a choice, and it's to help them support the re-entry back into the work and back into socialise in the community when they return.
So I guess it's two different things, this statement and, the concept that you're talking about here and modern slavery.
Yeah, but the element of freedom is key when we talk about modern slavery. So in this case, if I understood it well, the inmate has a choice whether to do something or not. So there's no coercion, there's no trick, so I wouldn't consider it modern slavery. I thought initially that they were forced to perform a task and that would be state-imposed forced labour, but my mistake, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very insightful. Thank you so much. That's such a thought-provoking and discussion-generating topic. So it might be something that we look at in future communities of practice. So, yeah, very interesting. And our next speaker is the lovely Elizabeth Lett from Arc Blue. And she is the Regional Director for Queensland and Northern Territory. And she's previously worked with the Department of Treasury in Victoria and Finance for almost 19 years before she's made the move to Queensland. And we're happy to have you in Queensland too. Elizabeth is a senior executive with a breadth of experience in financial management and governance, strategy and policy development, reform and implementation. Her experience spans both the private and public sector and includes multinational private sector organisations as well. Elizabeth is passionate about the opportunity to deliver greater value to our communities through procurement. She's a recognised leader in the sustainable procurement space and has led the Department of Victoria's Aboriginal procurement policy and social procurement framework from policy inception right through to implementation. This policy has been recognised as a world-leading whole of government procurement framework. And Elizabeth was invited to represent Victoria in the 2019, 2020 and 2021 Social Enterprise World Forum to present on the policies, designs and outcomes. Today's Elizabeth's topic is ethics in public procurement. Thank you so much. Oh, I'll do a hard click for you.
3, 2, 1. If things happen. Just give me the summary.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you everyone for having me here today. I think I've got a hard act to follow because that was certainly a very sobering and powerful presentation. So thank you to Daria and Bruce. So we've heard from Jeremy and Griffith this morning about the importance of ethical behaviour in supply chains. I'm going to actually change focus and we'll be exploring ethical behaviour within public servants. So as public servants, you all no doubt know that ethical behaviour is important. And I say this with some confidence because, as Lauren mentioned, I myself used to be a public servant, but within the Victorian government. So your employment, it's subject to the Public Service Code of Conduct and is governed by the fundamental principles of the Public Sector Ethics Act, which you can see on the slide here today. So today I'm not going to talk just about ethics, but I'm going to talk about what is it about procurement that makes ethical behaviour so important. What are some real life examples of where things can go wrong, and what can you in your day-to-day jobs do to minimise these scenarios? I've got quite a bit of information to share with you, but please do use this as an opportunity to be interactive and ask questions throughout if anything of interest you'd like to explore further. So on the next slide, we can see that ethical behaviour is important across all states and territories, with each jurisdiction, including recently the Commonwealth Government, having some form of corruption body. But fraud and corruption can occur in all aspects of public sector administration, not just in procurement. But we do know from our experience and from reviewing recent reports of these various anti-corruption bodies that the risk is arguably highest when it comes to procurement than over any other area of public administration. So why is this? If you wouldn't mind moving on, Lauren. So Arc Blue has looked through the reports of recent anti-corruption commissions over the last couple of years, and we've categorised the reasons into 3 main buckets. So firstly, there's aspects about role design, and by role design I mean the role descriptions of individuals within a procurement function, such as your Chief Procurement Officer or who might have financial delegation, as well as the design of the procurement function within the organisation as a whole. Often we see that there is a significant dollar value size of managed spend. There's often significant pressure and expectations from stakeholders, including for many of you in the room today, you'd be aware of the pressure from ministerial stakeholders. We also heard earlier through Jeremy's presentation about procurement being seen more and more as a lever to deliver more. The procurement profession is being asked to deliver more with less. And often we see that there's a lack of segregation of duties and responsibilities. When you look through the reports, there's also some consistent themes emerging in terms of organisational factors. Often we see that public sector organisations have a lack of investment in capability building. There's often a reactive rather than a proactive mindset, a lack of prevention planning, a lack of adequate procurement planning taking place. And often personal interests and conflicts of interest aren't effectively managed. Finally, when we look through the various reports, we also see consistent themes with regards to technology. Historically, there's been a low level of investment in public administration, in technology, and a lack of accurate and comprehensive data, which enables spend analysis and patterns of behaviour to be identified. These themes we've seen in the national Australian anti-corruption reports, but we've also seen this theme around procurement being particularly vulnerable, highlighted in more global contexts. For example, the OECD report notes that public procurement remains the government activity most vulnerable to waste, fraud and corruption due to the size of the financial flows involved. The ICAP Commission in South Australia noted that procurement and contracting is an activity with persistent maladministration and corruption risks, and which is highly valuable to exploitation and mismanagement. So down the bottom there, I've also highlighted a couple of statistics, which again might seem quite sobering. But every 1.4 days, the South Australian and New South Wales Corruption Commissions receive a new complaint relating to procurement. 54% of procurement investigations in WA relate to procurement, and closer to home in Queensland, 7,830 public servants have identified procurement as highly vulnerable to corruption. So that's a finding from a CCC report in 2021. So why should we care? Does anyone have any views there? You know, having worked in the public service, does anyone have any views on why we should care about? Yes. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And both of those are very good reasons. We see increasingly in the media a decline in public trust, which is essential to effective public service administration, service delivery and administration. We've had noted the importance of achieving value for money out of public funds. Public funds are limited. We're all taxpayers. We need to maximise the resources that are made available to deliver essential public services across our communities. And we also, from a personal perspective and an organisational perspective, need to reduce the risk of professional and reputational damage. So each of you, I would like to think, will take away from today some insights around educating yourself, your teams and your organisations about the importance of good probity in public procurement. So on that note, I thought I would share some case studies of real life examples, learnings and the consequences of where ethical behaviour in procurement can fall short on expectations. I'll note that some of these examples might appear personal and somewhat confronting, but that's really the purpose of sharing these with you, and they are all fully available in the public arena. So my first example is from the Australian National Audit Office. And this is the findings of a recent Audit Office report. So in 2020 and 2021, the Digital Transformation Agency procured high-value ICT services, and the Audit Office found that this fell well short of ethical standards. The agency had a largely compliant procurement policy in place, but it wasn't followed. Probity advice was insufficiently thought, despite the high value of the procurements. Potential conflicts of interest were not managed, and contracts were repeatedly leveraged. On one instance, this included a contract being varied 10 times over 10 years, increasing its original value from around 120,000 to over 4 million. The contract scope also changed, including in one case where it was about providing advice on a business case to being expanded to include providing advice over four different teams in the organisation. Contract variations were also authorised by the delegate, despite that person receiving advice from the central procurement area and others that the variations weren't an effective or an efficient use of public resources. Does anyone think that there might be some red flags or learnings from that scenario? So some of the key lessons that on review that Arc Blue drawed out from this particular scenario is that having a compliant procurement policy is obviously very important, but having a policy alone isn't likely to be sufficient protection against unethical or non-compliant behaviour. You need to have in place measures to routinely check adoption of that policy. Robust contract management procedures need to be in place, including procedures for capturing defensible justifications for contract variations. I don't think anyone would agree that in any scenario are 10 variations to a significant contract without justification. Is that going to be good practice? It's also important to ensure that your delegates have a strong understanding of not only procurement, but their responsibilities before nominating them as a delegate. And always keep records justifying any decisions to act against advice, including, capturing what your defensible justifications might be for departing. The next case study is an example a bit closer to home. It's an example from Racing Queensland in 2021. So following a CCC investigation, a former infrastructure and operations manager at Racing Queensland was charged with fraud and misconduct in relation to public office, both of which constituted a criminal offence. During their employment at Racing Queensland, the employee's role included arranging tenders for 5 contracts. As a favour to a friend, who has also ended up being a co-accused, and who was bidding for Racing Queensland work, the employee disclosed confidential information about competitors' pricing and about the amount of budget that Racing Queensland had allocated to the works. Although the employee was fully aware of their responsibilities and had signed a conflict of interest, they hid that association with the external contractor from Racing Queensland. Despite finding that the former employee was not personally receiving any financial benefit from their actions, the CCC found that their actions had given a friend considerable advantage and subverted the proper commercial tender process. They were convicted and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. So what are some of the lessons that we can see from that particular case study? The importance of having a robust conflict of interest and declaration policy in place and updating that, retesting it, not setting and forgetting. Often we see organisations and public sector organisations that will say, oh, all our employees had to sign a conflict of interest when they joined the public service. That might be 10 years ago. What are you doing to actively refresh, manage and test those each time a significant activity comes up? It's also critical to have high confidentiality protocols in place and ensure access controls are strong and effective to sensitive information, and create a consequence culture. Sessions like this, making your staff aware what are the consequences of when ethical behaviour isn't up to standard. My final case study is another Queensland example from Fire and Emergency Services. So in May 2019, a former employee, Stephen Sparks, was jailed for 3 years and served 6 months after pleading guilty to 4 counts of official corruption. The investigation was not initiated by internal controls, but was by virtue of people outside of the organisation, including an anonymous source. So Steve Sparks managed significant procurement for Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, including sourcing uniforms, cleaning, decontamination of uniforms and warehousing inventory. He arranged secondary employment for himself as a consultant with 2 companies that were tendering for the work. He took active steps to assist these companies in the preparation of tenders for fire and emergency services work worth more than $10 million, including releasing confidential tender information and making recommendations to selection panels favouring those companies. Again, no doubt you can see that this behaviour falls short of expectations. What are some of the learnings that we can take from this? It's around having a clear complaint reporting mechanisms in place that provide confidence to complainants that their issues will be dealt with adequately. Ensuring that you have a robust process, again, for deciding and regularly updating conflicts of interest. And whilst not going into the detail in this, when you look through the report, there's some clear examples of the role that technology could have played in detecting this fraud. So from those case studies, I'm hoping that you can see that there's some clear actions that you can take today and share with your teams. First of all, having a compliant procurement policy is critical, but don't set and forget it. Regularly test your policy against activity. And there's some steps here that you can consider. Test and question role segregation within your function. Promote regular routine disclosures of interest for staff and review these regularly. Test that you have effective supervision and procurement planning in place. Promote a pro-integrity culture and celebrate success. I loved hearing at the start Sharon's examples of the Buy Queensland Buyer Awards. In fact, I'm actually doing some work with the Northern Territory Government, and I've been pointing to Queensland as an example of a better practice example of how you can celebrate and build a culture that values capability in procurement. And as part of that, map awareness of your capability within your team and what is required for each role to uplift capability. So I wanted to end today's presentation with some lessons learned by a public servant who was actually convicted for 5 years imprisonment for corrupt conduct. So on this video, you're going to see Carl Wolf, who is a former local government CEO. The point of showing you this video is to show that whatever approach you take in managing probity in your procurement function, it really needs to be multifaceted. Different people respond in different ways. Some people will respond well to policies, being told what to do, others to culture and values, and some will be more motivated by understanding the real world consequences of what happens when you don't do the right thing, which is really the purpose of showing you this video. It goes for about 5 minutes. I do encourage you to watch through to the end because there's some very important insights.
So yeah, my name's Carl Wolf. I'm married with 2 children, grown-up children. I was the Chief Executive Officer of Ipswich City Council from July 2006 until December 2013. I held other Chief Executive Officer positions in Victoria and New South Wales. I'm now retired and I'm speaking to you now from the Arthur Gorrie Correctional Centre where I'm on remand waiting sentencing, which will happen next week. So I now expect to be here for some time. You know, I've been through a lot of things in my life, divorces and death in the family and things like that, and all of those basically pale into insignificance compared to the impact of being charged with a corruption and pervert the course of justice charge that I was back in October 2017. In terms of, you know, like if you've been through a divorce, that's very stressful. If you've been through a death in the family, it's very stressful. But if you want to rate those on a scale of 1 to 10, then this exercise with a corruption charge is probably a 12, and death in the family or divorce is about 5. So the stresses that you would experience in this sort of circumstances, everything else in your life probably pales into insignificance. The only thing I could think of that would even be comparable would be if you were told you had a terminal illness. Well, my occupation, I qualified as an engineer and undertook the roles of Chief Executive Officer for more than 10 years. I guess in my case, when this all happened, I was already retired, but if this had happened to me 20 years ago, basically my career would have been over in local government, and the chances of getting any sort of job other than some menial task, a low-paying menial task, would be pretty unrealistic. So for something like this to happen to you, would really just wipe out the rest of your career. Forget what any aspirations you had for your career, and basically look for something else, but it's not going to be satisfying or as well-paying or as interesting as the career that you've given up because of stupid mistakes. It's at times like this you find out who your real friends are, and I can tell you that there aren't many. You soon find out most people who are friends, or you think are friends because of the position you hold or whatever. But I know that now I can count on one hand the people who I'd classify as still being friends. So your social circle basically just about disappears or to become pretty much non-existent, other than a few real people who you would call close friends. And obviously, generally family will stick with you, but that's about it. Forget the rest. Well, financial effects are also devastating because, first of all, you've lost your job. Unlikely to get another job in any time soon, so you generally have no income. You have to engage lawyers, which is a sensible thing to do, but they're not cheap. And then things happen such as the confiscation. People come back and whatever you got in terms of corrupt monies received, they'll take that back from you. So, and if you don't have it, you have to find a way to get that money. In my case, I had preempted this and actually sold our home and had the money available, which I'd already put into the lawyer's trust account for that purpose, which was fortunate because the orders for confiscation resulted in the banks freezing all my accounts. So whatever money you've got in the bank, all of a sudden under the confiscation orders, your whole income stream and your whole access to funds are totally frozen, and the banks will not release that until the confiscation orders are lifted. So it's a devastating aspect that you have to sell your own home and return all the money that you've ever got from your corrupt activity, and you have no income, and in the short term you may have no access to any money that you happen to have in the bank. So unless you've got alternative resources, which some people would not have, you can find yourself in pretty dire straits. Again, another additional stress to the stresses you're already suffering from undertaking your legal defence against the charges brought. I think in my case, my family's always been very supportive, but I'm the oldest in the family, and my father's dead, and I'm the over power of attorney from my mother, who's 92. I've always been looked on and respected in the family as being the sort of pseudo father figure and dependable, reliable, and all those sort of things. Even though they say that they still have, the respect for me and still hold me in esteem and that sort of thing, I'm sure that there is a significant amount of disappointment and disbelief from them that this has all happened. And to some extent, the family and the extended family are also subject to the embarrassment of the media and the publication and people asking them what's happening and what's going on. So not only do you suffer stress, but all those people around you, family and friends, also are suffering some degree of stress as a consequence. Yeah, I have 2 children. I have a daughter and a son. Again, they've been very supportive, but they've been pretty much devastated by the impact on them and the people who they know, who now know, and they have to live with that. I don't think I'll ever recover the same level of respect that I had from them that prior to this that I have now, but they still support me. But I believe there is a diminishing in the respect and esteem that they hold me in because of this. Nothing in life can prepare you for being in prison unless you've been in prison. I know one of the lawyers said to me, oh, you'll probably be okay after a couple of weeks to get used to it. Well, I've been here now 7 weeks and I'm probably only just getting used to it now. It's a total loss of your freedom. There's very little to do. You're mixing with people that you would never imagine that you would mix with in your normal lifetime. And the days are very long and slow. As I said, there's not much to do. I read, but there's only so much you can do to read. There is really not a great deal of other things you can do except while away the time and count the days and hope it comes to an end. But certainly the most, I've probably not experienced this level of anxiety on a daily basis that since I've been in prison. So every day you wake up, you're not sure what's going to happen. It's a volatile environment. There's a lot of different people with different issues. So it's certainly not somewhere that you want to ever find yourself. Yeah, it's funny that I actually remember the first time anybody offered me a corrupt payment or a bribe, and that was sort of back in the 70s when I was still training as an engineer, and I was given the task of looking after driveway constructions into private properties. And there was a number of contractors in that space at the time. And I think one of them offered me $50 to get the driveway done quicker than would normally get done. And this was in a time when I probably earned about, $150 a week. So in relative terms, it was quite a reasonable amount. But I refused it at that time. I guess I was smart enough in those days not to take that bribe. But I've had lots of things over the years where contractors and developers have subtly hinted to, making it worth my while to do something, which I've always avoided and refused. Unfortunately for me, in 2012 and 13, I found myself in a significant financial problem with a business venture that was going bad and investments that were not doing well after the GFC. Whereas in the past, I had managed to avoid and not accept any bribes or corrupt payments. The circumstances at the time made me take that offer. I wish now that I had not. I wish I had found another way to do to sort out my financial problems. It certainly would have been a lot less painful than the outcome that resulted from taking those corrupt payments. Oh, I'd say just say no. I mean, my advice is that anything that involves more than one person, that is yourself, as soon as somebody else has information that is detrimental to you, they can use that information at that time in the future. Once you accept those sort of things, you're pretty well locked into continuing that exercise because you have given them some leverage over you, and I don't think you ever want to have somebody with leverage over you. So my advice is just say no. And in fact, in hindsight, some of the things I've been offered in the past, I should have actually documented and reported, which is, I didn't do that at the time, but I think if I had to wind back the clock, that's what I would do now. I'd document those things, report those issues, definitely say no, and virtually have nothing more to do with the person who made the offer. I don't think anybody who does this sort of things, they're going to get caught, and I think that's a real failing in the logical thinking that you should have. As I was saying, if more than one person knows about it, the chances of you getting caught are significantly increased. The more people involved, the more chance you've got of being caught. And that's not to say if nobody else knows about it, the system and the processes might catch you anyway. But I think in this day and age, the chances of undertaking something of a corrupt nature and thinking you're not going to be caught is naive and a stupid thing to think that you will get caught sometime. In my case, it was many years later. You think you've got away with it, but the reality is these things can come back at any time, whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 years later. there is a significant chance that this will catch up with you at some point in time when you least think about it. I have some very good observations about that now, especially as I have many days to reflect on what happened and who was involved. But the bottom line is that people who offer you a bribe or a corrupt payment are really only in that for themselves. They don't really have any consideration of the impact on you. They're only looking at what's in it for them. They may come across as being your best friend, and in fact, some of the people I dealt with did come across as being my best friend. But when the going gets tough, they will throw you to the wolves to save their own skin. So whilst they come across as being friendly and looking at how they can help you, in real terms, they're only looking at how they can help themselves. They have no interest in what's beneficial for you. Senior managers and the CEOs, there's no doubt they set the culture of the organisation in more ways than one. And in terms of the integrity and honesty of the organisation, that's a prime responsibility they have. I think it's fair to say that all of my roles that I've held, except the one which has caused me to be here, I've managed to have good internal audit systems and integrity and all the rest of it. And but it doesn't matter how good you are and how well you've done in the past, what you do in terms of undertaking a corrupt activity is in some respects decimate the integrity and the reputation of the organisation, which when it gets covered in the media because one person or a few people do the wrong thing, then the whole organisation is tarred with the same brush. That has a significant impact on the culture of the organisation, and that can take many years to recover from that those events. In terms of somebody giving you tickets to the football or taking you to lunch, I mean, fundamentally there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's always been my view there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I think to identify corruption or people who might be interested in corrupting you, they will start off fundamentally small, maybe just buying you a cup of coffee. But slowly, it's a bit like a cancer, slowly and slowly it eats away at the body of the organisation through you. So a cup of coffee becomes dinner or lunch, then it might become a day at the races or a day at the football. Then it might be a weekend away somewhere, and slowly that cancer and cancerous approach increases to the point where you then become involved in real corrupt activity, which will come back, as I said, to bite you straight away or at some time in the future, or will be used against you to increase the favours that you now feel in a position where you can't say no to. And the personal impact is immeasurable. We all come into the world with wanting to leave something that people remember us by. And I've done a lot of things in my career that would be seen as innovative and great for the community. The unfortunate thing is now that I'll be remembered for the worst things. So if you involve yourself in corruption, forget about all the good things you might have thought you were going to be remembered for, because you won't be. You'll only be remembered for the bad thing you did, even if it's only once. That's all you'll be remembered for, and that's not what anybody wants to end their career or be remembered for in this life. It's certainly not. It's something that plays on my mind a lot, that the things I wanted to be remembered for are all forgotten, and I think that's probably more hurtful to me than anything else, just about the loss of respect, the loss of esteem, the loss of remembering what was done for the benefit of a lot of people. So that's an impact. That's a very personal impact, but it is something I think about probably every day. One of the frustrating things about the legal system is the length of time it takes. So I was charged in October 2017, and I would be sentenced in next week, which will be the 15th of February 2019. When I talk to some of the inmates in here,
Sorry, there might have been a mix-up there with a bit longer than what was intended playing, but yeah, that is available online, and hopefully you can see that there's some important messages there and real-life consequences from someone who, as you said, started small. Can see how that can snowball. So thank you very much for your time, everyone, today. Just in conclusion, has anyone got any questions that they wanted to ask, either in the room or online?
And if we have any questions come through, we'll get Elizabeth to answer them when we email everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So, I'm very well aware that there is food in the room for people that are here, and I don't want to distract you from it any further, and we have reached time. So I'd just really like to go through a couple of closing messages, and I won't keep you much longer. So for future updates to these events, if you haven't already done so, register at the Buy Queensland link. We also send out a capability newsletter, and we try to send it out every month, and sometimes it goes out every second month depending on how much information we have to share with you. But please email skills to procure and we will add you to that list. Remember to take our feedback survey. There's a QR code there on the screen, and we'll send you a physical, like the actual link as well, depending on how you want to access that. And we do use that to improve, whether it be location, food, if it's too cold in the room, anything. So, but also be kind. And thank you so much to all of our wonderful presenters. Everybody donates their time for this, and they aren't paid, and they're very generous, and they have to interact with Sharon and I and make sure that, you know, that these presentations are quality presentations, and they are every single time. So we appreciate it so much, and the wealth of expertise that you bring to this room and this audience is just beyond measurability for us and our team as a capability function. It's so valuable, so thank you so much. Also, thank you to Clifton's for hosting us today, and also thank you everybody, because you've taken time out of your days to be here, and that shows how much you prioritise your understanding of your procurement and contract management function and how much you value that. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for being here. And it's been a beautiful day so far. So one last thing, we hope to have another session in November this year, so in 8-ish weeks. I'd also like to thank Sharon McCaney, who is the lovely lady in the pink and yellow at the back, who has been wonderful. She has been amazing in the last 8 weeks, and has basically organised this while I haven't been able to assist her in any way. So thank you, Sharon. You are amazing. And the last thing I'll say is, nobody is leaving here without taking some food and drink, and I'm going to stand by the door and order everybody, okay? Thank you to our online audience as well. Please register again for November. Thank you so much. Thank you.